today in this lecture, we are going to look at the scientific status or character of sociology. So, it is termed Sociology and Science, our lecture. Before we go into it, we would briefly look at the background of the discipline and give focus a little more on the Enlightenment, just a little, in order to contextualize our discussion today. We know sociology emerged in the context of rapid dissolution of the old feudal order in Western Europe, and that dissolution, that dismantling, collapsing, whatever you say, was brought about by Enlightenment philosophy. Its influence was remarkable. Enlightenment philosophy, the industrial and French revolutions, and also earlier as what we have done earlier with regard to the conservative romantic reaction, it actually traced the beginnings of that dissolution to the history of modernism, European modernism, going back as far as at least the Protestant Reformation. We will focus more here on the Enlightenment because that is more connected with our contentions of the discipline as a scientific one. So, with Enlightenment, what did the Enlightenment do? The Enlightenment, as Zeitlin tells us, systematically and methodically studied the human condition by applying the principles of science, of scientific study. Science as knowledge based on the principles of empiricism, experiments, and reason was considered to be supreme form of knowledge. Thereby, Enlightenment, by upholding science as the only legitimate form of knowledge, discredited the claim that scriptures and revelations were sources of knowledge. It thereby completely delegitimized the claims of the Church as the custodian of knowledge. Related to this, Enlightenment thinkers believed that because humans were endowed with the ability to reason, they could use reason to measure the suitability of institutions for human nature and their own infinite progress. Their premises of reason, science, rationality, secularism, individualism influenced the French revolutionaries. Now, all this created a kind of vacuum. Why? Because the old order had collapsed, but the new order was yet to fully come into existence. And therefore, a reaction was natural to this. It came in the form of, as we know, the conservative romantic reaction. It mounted attacks against the Enlightenment and the society that the industrial and French revolutions were bringing forth, modern industrial secular society. It rejected scientific, secular and rational principles and argued that society has a soul whose character, whose essence was essentially religious and which could only be apprehended through intuition and feeling, and not through science and the application of scientific knowledge. The reaction had a profound impact on the founders of sociology. Yet, the founders were convinced that society must be studied scientifically. This kind of a study, a scientific study, would not only allow us to understand our present condition, but also to tell us what we were before. So, in a way, trace that history and, like the natural sciences, also predict the future. We begin here with Comte, who was the founder of sociological positivism. Comte was convinced that only a science of society that was modeled along the lines of the natural sciences could help understand the past stages of human society, predict the future, and be of benefit to humanity by bringing about an orderly progress in society. And therefore, he conceived sociology as a positive science of society. Comte insisted on adapting the methods of inquiry for sociology from the natural sciences: observation, experimentation, and comparison. The points of departure, Comte argued, for sociology, that point should be the whole and not its constituent parts. Sociological positivism provided for an organismic analogy for society. Society was considered like nature, governed by natural, immutable, and invariable laws. Now we go on to Emile Durkheim's positivism. Emile Durkheim was the one who instituted sociology as a university discipline. He argued that none of the 19th century sociologists, Swinjwood, we get from Swinjwood, that included Comte, hardly went beyond generalities concerning the nature of societies, the relationships between the social and the biological realms. And therefore, what he tried to do was to give a definite shape with subject matter to sociology and a rigorous scientific method. So he was against any reductionist explanations of social behavior. For him, society was a reality sui generis which was irreducible in nature and which could not be understood simply by putting together its constituent parts. Its reality was more than its constituent, the summation of its constituent parts. Durkheim defined social facts as collective ways of acting, thinking, and feeling, which are external to humans and are constraining in nature. They are also general in nature. Social facts are internalized by individuals through the process of socialization, and they act as moral guides to behavior to the extent that they have been internalized by the individuals and they have entered individual consciousness. Durkheim distinguished this discipline from psychology, which he considered dealt with individual consciousness. What Durkheim argued was that social phenomena arise when interacting individuals constitute a reality that can no longer be accounted for in terms of the properties of individual actors. Durkheim laid down the first methodological tenet that one social fact should be studied in terms of other social facts, and therefore it was a form of methodological collectivism, which was to focus on the study of groups, characteristics, their structures, instead of studying individual attributes. Social facts, therefore, were not simple objects existing independently of human consciousness and action simply out there. A social fact was a collective entity, like a family, religion, a professional organization. It was characterized by an underlying order or structure which was hidden from ordinary perception. So Durkheim's sociology, as Swinjwood tells us, was an attempt to establish the pattern which lay behind all observable phenomena. He focused very importantly on internalization of social facts by individuals, because that is the way, through internalization, and that happens through the process of socialization, that society enters the individual as a moral binding force. It is this moral force which forms the basis of social solidarity and order. So, the object of sociology is not merely the external social facts, but the ways in which society penetrates the individual, making social facts moral facts and therefore binding upon individuals. It is in this way that individuals become functional elements in the social whole. He argued that social facts must be studied as objects of inquiry. And in order to do that, the investigator must leave behind the biases, the values premises before entering the field of study, because these would preclude then the contamination of social facts by the investigator's subjectivity. Karl Marx propounded a radical theory of change. Karl Marx's theory provided sociology with a new dimension, and it has been also argued that much of sociology after Marx was a sort of debate with the ghost of Karl Marx. What did Marx propound? That society was a structure that was built around antagonistic classes, division of labor, progressive alienation of humanity, and forms of private property. That the moving force behind history was the force of class conflict. He, along with Engels, developed the scientific basis for the study of social development, the materialist conception of history. And for him, the motion of classes and societies are governed by the laws of dialectics. How do they function? That there are contradictions between the forces and relations of production. At first, and this is where dialectics would play the role. At first, the relations of production and the forces of production are in harmony. But the continuous growth of the forces of production over time, while the relations of production remain more or less the same in that stage, but the forces of production, the material forces of production, continue to grow. And over time, there comes a point of conflict with the existing relations of production. So much so that the existing relations of production begin to act as shackles to the further development of the forces of production. And this culminates in a period of social revolution where the class that represents a more progressive mode of production comes out victorious in the battle. So, it is this class conflict that has seen the development of society through one mode of production to another. Now, we enter German idealist philosophy, which was against positivism. Positivism assumed a fundamental continuity between the domains of nature and culture. So, therefore, because of this fundamental continuity, positivism underscored that the methods appropriate for the study of nature could also be adapted for the study of culture, of human society. The German tradition of idealist philosophy vigorously opposed the positivist tradition. For them, nature and culture were entirely and essentially different realms. So, natural laws could have no place in the domain of human culture, which was construed as a domain of freedom by the German idealist philosophical tradition. Sociology for this tradition did not really have any object of study. Why? Because society was merely a convenient label, a rough label, but that was essentially devoid of substance. Thus, sociology could not be a science at all. Against this, Simmel argued with his theory of association. George Simmel argued against both the organicist positivist and idealist positions. For Simmel, society was an intricate web of multiple interactions and relations between individuals which embody the principle of association. So, the collective or supra-individual structures such as family, religion, clan, group, economic organizations or bureaucracy were all crystallizations of interaction between humans. So, the subject matter of sociology is then the study of association, that is the patterns and forms of these interactions take and reproduce over time. Sociology for Simmel then should identify, what is the task for sociology? To identify the pure forms of association and engage both with the uniqueness of historical phenomena and the underlying uniformities. This is where Simmel not only argued for what is the subject matter of sociology, but also argued against the contention of the German idealist school. He says that without association, the human subject could hardly exist. But the forms of association restrict the autonomy of the human subject. Simmel's concept of society is one built around the dualisms of human existence. So, there is conflict and harmony, love and hate. How did Weber define sociology? For Weber, sociology was a comprehensive science of social action. And in this way, he argued against both the German historical school and the positivist school. So, therefore, what is it? He said that humans, the study of human society and human culture, of human behavior, presents us with advantage, that it could both be studied from outside. What are the patterns of behavior, let us say? So, like positivism would say, from outside, and also from within, by studying the motivations of actors. Why do we have such patterns of behavior? Therefore, for him, understanding those motivations is absolutely essential. For him, after all, action must have meaning for both the actor and towards whom the action is oriented. Otherwise, there would be no social action. There could be no patterns of behavior. Finally, because why? There are social facts, but social facts in the last instance is, in the last resort, are intelligible facts. So, therefore, Weber turned sociology into a far more comprehensive science than positivism could consider it to be. So, we come here to the problems of method with Weber. He rejected the historicist contention that delegitimized the possibility of generalizations about human action, society and culture. Weber posited that the method of science always proceeded by abstraction of elements from the manifold aspects of reality and generalizations. Therefore, these abstractions always involve selections, and this was true of the sciences dealing with the human as well as the natural worlds. So, in order to do that, he provided us with a unique tool, ideal types. An ideal type is formed by the one-sided accentuation of one or more points of view, and by the synthesis of a great many diffuse, discrete, more or less present and occasionally absent concrete individual phenomena. They are arranged according to those one-sidedly emphasized viewpoints into a unified analytical construct. What does it provide the scientist with? A measuring rod, as Coase tells us from Weber, to ascertain similarities and deviations in concrete cases from the ideal types of these cases. It is a method for comparative study. Now, for Weber, interpretive understanding, that is Verstehen, okay, was only a preliminary step to the establishment of causal relationships. Reliving help in grasping the subjective meaning of an action. But in order to become a science, interpretive explanation must become a causal explanation. You see, he clearly moves away, therefore, from the German historicist school against that tradition and argues for looking for causality and patterns. Verstehen and causal explanation, Weber asserts, far from being mutually opposed, are correlative principles in the methods in social sciences. Only then can the knowledge that we have gathered be comprehensive. Now, we come to the question of, it's a thorny problem, of value relevance and value neutrality. Now, unlike what the historicist school argued, the German tradition, the idealist philosophy argued, it is not the alleged inapplicability of natural science methods that account for the distinction between the natural and social sciences. Rather, what accounts for this distinction are the different aims and interests of the natural and social scientist. While the social scientists look for lawful generalizations of human actions, like natural scientists do, they are also interested in something else, the underlying motivations of human actors, the meanings that they attach to their actions. And this therefore poses the problem of contamination through the values of the investigator. How do we deal with that problem? Weber deals with the problem by making a distinction between value relevance and value neutrality. That the choice of subject for investigation for both the natural scientist and the social scientist is dictated by the values of the investigator. Therefore, values play a role in the very selection of the area of study, of the object of inquiry. But once this has been done, that is, the problem has been chosen for study, the investigator must hold all values in abeyance and must not allow the investigator's subjectivity and values to color the collection of facts and the interpretation of those. So, this distinction is also related to something else very important, the world of values and the world of facts. Weber argued that it was impossible to arrive at ought statements, that is based on value judgment, from is factual statements. And he was fundamentally opposed to those who argued for a morality based on science, be it Enlightenment thinkers or even the towering figure of Emile Durkheim. We have discussed, of course, in a very brief manner, very cursory manner, the debates around the scientific status of the discipline of sociology. We have only kind of picked on some, and that too some aspects of it for the purposes of this lecture. We may now wind it up by following Steve Bruce and what he says about sociology's characteristics as a scientific discipline. Now this, he writes, so Bruce writes, in the context of contemporary post-structuralist, contemporary context of post-structuralist and postmodernist theories, where scientific method has been contested and also derided. So he argues that, he points out a few things, 4 things, that a good scientific theory should be internally consistent, it should accord with evidence, science constantly changes so that there is no final truth, and the central feature that distinguishes science from non-science is the question of how does it deal with failure. Science must change its theories in the light of new evidence. In this way, we end our lecture on sociology and science. Thank you very much.